All right, welcome to the second episode of the Level Up Mastermind podcast. Today I have with me Carson Hess, co-founder of Development AI. Before we begin, I just want to say that Carson is a new member to Level Up, and we are ecstatic to have him. There is nothing this guy does not do. Carson, you've managed over $100 million worth of construction management projects, have a background in mechanical engineering, run a real estate tech company, manage multiple nonprofits at multiple levels, and on top of that, compete in intense combat sports like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You run a blog for fun. I mean, is there anything you don't do, Carson? And tell us how old you are.
Certainly. Yeah, well, there's definitely a lot of things that I don't do. But I'm 25. I turned 25 in June.
Wow, that is quite a list of accomplishments for 25. You must be really proud of yourself.
Got a long way to go, man. It's a never-ending journey of getting better and just trying to put one step in front of the other. You know what I mean?
I hear you. Well, thanks for coming on with us today. As a developer, I'm super stoked to be talking about development AI, but kind of before we get into that, I'd love to start out just hearing a little bit about your background and kind of what got you into real estate.
Yeah, that's a great question. What got me into real estate was fundamentally, my mother was a real estate broker when I was growing up in New Jersey. My dad was in real estate a little bit as well. And then I also had a couple of key mentors around me that were in real estate. And around that same time that my parents were getting into real estate, and I realized that I had a couple of mentors that had made all their money in real estate, I read a little book that, anybody listening to this probably knows and has read called Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert T. Kiyosaki. And, you go on any Bigger Pockets podcast, that's the book that's influenced any real estate investor, right? People after reading that book, they understand that passive income is really the way to generate long-term generational wealth. And so after reading that at 19, it's just opened up this entire new door for me in my life where during that time, I was basically in school to study mechanical engineering and just didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do. Prior to that, I was thinking that I wanted to be a biomedical engineer or that I wanted to practice medicine. But the reason that I actually switched out of biomedical engineering was because the field was too specific and I didn't want to lock myself into something that was that specific. And so I did transfer into something that was a lot more general and a lot more broad just because it resulted in more options for me. But that being said, once I read that book, it kind of made me realize that, engineering and whatever it was that I'd be doing in the corporate world was kind of a means to an end. My plan was always to take that money and funnel it into real estate through investing projects. And my goal basically when I was 19 was to become a full-time real estate entrepreneur. So when I was about 21, my junior going into senior year of college, I actually got a real estate license down in New Jersey and practiced there for a little bit. And I just didn't really do that good with it. A lot of it was just because I didn't put the effort in that was necessary to succeed. And I also didn't really have the professional skills necessary to succeed. I didn't know how to negotiate. And being that young in a profession like real estate agency is extremely difficult. Not to say that it can't be done. There's plenty of young guns out there that are absolutely crushing it in the real estate field. But at that time, I just didn't have the maturity and the professional skills that were necessary to be successful in that field. So then fast forward to when I graduated from Rutgers, I moved out to Denver. I was working in construction management on a light rail extension project. So basically managing all of the electrification aspects of the transit system out in Denver. And then after about 8 months, I got transferred out to Boston. Been here in 2 weeks, it'll be my third anniversary of moving to Boston. And I was working on the Green Line extension project, which anyone local will be familiar with that. It's basically a 5-mile extension of the Green Line from East Cambridge to Medford. So I was working there for about 2.5 years. And during that time, real estate's still in the back of my mind. I'm making good enough money that I'm saving quite a bit. I was actually living in a living room to try and save as much money as I could, which had its own, it's kind of its own separate story, but learned a lot about how to be a landlord by just living with a bunch of other bad tenants, and took that money. I I invested it in a ground up condo project in Chelsea as a limited partner. I bought my first house in Malden, and I basically house hacked that. I rent out a couple of the bedrooms. And then around that same time, I met my now business partner, Kevin, who is a software engineer at the time working for Indigo, which is an agricultural technology company. And what he was telling me was that he was working on a project that could basically tell you what could be built on any particular parcel of land. And so obviously as a developer, you know that takes some understanding of the zoning code, in particular the zoning map, and understanding first kind of what zone we're actually in, and then applying the zoning rules and restrictions to understand, you know, what the specific requirements are of any particular property. So we took that idea and we took it to the developer that I had actually invested in that condo project with, and just kind of became clear that we had something that was going to be valuable. And through that iterative process, we brought it to more developers, and it just, you know, we kept getting positive feedback, and it got to the point where it made sense for both Kevin and I to quit our full-time jobs. So he quit his around March of 2020, right when everything was going down with the pandemic. And then I quit mine shortly thereafter in middle of May 2020. And we've been full-time ever since.
Wow. What an incredible story. And, you know, I just want to go back first to, you know, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I know that, you know, from our discussions in Level Up that you're an avid reader, you know, a bibliophile, if you will. So can you just briefly tell us, you know, how reading has played a role in this drive that you have? Because, I mean, even the story that you just told us, I mean, you've crossed, you know, multiple disciplines into the real estate world. You know, your compass seems to be pretty dialed. And, you know, that's what got you to where you are today. So how has sort of the habit of reading and picking up these books influenced you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Reading for me, honestly, has been the key to everything that I've done. Well, I guess I shouldn't say the key, but it's been one of two keys. I think the other key was my background as a wrestler and as a grappler, which parlays into what I do today with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But, you know, from a high level, I always think of my life having not even really started until I read that book in some sense, because prior to reading that book, you know, I was very much kind of just like a very typical kind of average minded person, you know, just kind of going with the flow, thinking that it was okay to be bad in school, thinking it was okay to be out partying all the time and just not doing my work, thinking that it was okay to be average, you know. But I think, number one, reading that book when I was 19 and delivering pizzas in between college semesters, it really, like I said, just opened up this entire new world for me, where once I had that goal of I'm going to be a real estate entrepreneur, then my immediate next thought was, what can I do to get there? You know, like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, maybe it's Rich Dad, Poor Dad or Think and Grow Rich, but it's always asking about how can I rather than saying I can't. And so naturally the question that I asked myself was, how can I become a real estate entrepreneur? And the answer was, number one, learn how real estate works, learn how business works, because as an investor, you're going to be running a business. And I just got so infatuated with reading after reading that book, because I read that it delivered so much value to me. It's still the highest return on investment that I've ever made in my life, is reading that book. The second book that I picked up was Think and Grow Rich. And then after that, it was just all business books, all real estate books. And I mean, I'm looking around my room right now. I mean, I've got like 12 books that are just surrounding me right now. And then downstairs, I have a bookshelf that's overflowing. It's got probably 100 books on it. And I've got another 50 that are in my basement. I mean, it's become a full-blown obsession. And when I'm not reading books, I'm listening to podcasts, I'm listening to audiobooks, or I'm writing. So it's constantly the stream of information coming in. You know, when I don't know something, when I first got started in the transit industry, for instance, the first thing I did when I signed that contract was I ordered a textbook on how railway systems work. And then after that, it's like I ended up actually writing a training manual for my job, because like I just pictured there being someone like me that was coming in that, you know, transit is something so specialized that you can't learn about it from looking at Google or whatever. You got to talk to people that have been in the industry for a long time, and it's basically an oral tradition. But the second thing, so reading is the first thing. The second thing, as far as like the drive, that really comes from my background as a wrestler. You know, I was never an exceptional wrestler by any means, but what I did do was I really took the lessons and the character building aspects of that to heart. So wrestling is for anybody that's wrestled, it's an incredibly tough and grueling sport physically, but also mentally. So in high school, we would be, I started wrestling when I was 10 years old, but in high school, we would be training 3 hours every single day, Monday through Friday. We'd have, 4 matches on Saturday. Sometimes we'd have matches during the week. And the whole time you're just getting completely destroyed. It's running, it's people yelling at you, it's being so tired that you can't do anything else and always having to dig down and find that last little drop, and always believing that you can get more. So from that perspective, it's just created this immense drive where I have this goal and I know what I want to do, whatever the domain is, whether it's real estate or something in the nonprofit world or even jujitsu. Having a goal and having a serious focus on it, and then having a drive that seems to never end is what's going to get anybody anywhere, especially when you layer in the knowledge piece of it. It's just, it makes you feel almost as if you can try and do anything. It's an elimination of any limiting beliefs.
Wow, that's powerful stuff. And what I'll do for our listeners is I'll link a few of your favorite books down below so that you can check them out. And while we're on this topic, before we get into development AI, let's just touch on the success minded. So
Sure.
You're talking about, wrestling and in these sports and how that's contributed to your success, and also reading. But it's the success minded, which is this online blog that you started for fun to really share what you've learned with others. So tell us a little bit about the success minded, where people can, read some of these posts.
Yeah. As you mentioned, the success minded really started as a passion project between my friend Spencer DeWitt and I. Spencer and I were colleagues at Balfour Beatty, our previous employer, and also ironically bought houses 300 feet from each other in Malden and both house hacked them together. The success minded, to your point, is really about sharing some of those lessons learned on a lot of different levels. So that same drive that I was just talking about in the answer to my previous question also had a lot of unanticipated byproducts, right? Pushing yourself so hard from the time that I was 19 when I read Rich Dad Poor Dad to when I was 24, almost 25, and quit my full-time job, I was working 7 days a week, whether it was on the W-2 job, working 10, 12 hours a day at that. On the weekends, I spent all my time reading, and all my time, if I wasn't training, then it would be working on some kind of side hustle, all with that ultimate goal of getting to become a real estate investor full-time. And working that long, that hard at something for 6 years, especially as a young individual, creates a lot of unintended byproducts. It creates a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of fear. It created a lot of imposter syndrome, right? Like, who am I to be 24 or 25 and think that I'm going to go run a tech company, right? And so from that perspective, it really shifted the reading interest and my general interest from things in business and real estate to things that are more along the lines of spirituality and things like mindfulness, for instance. So that's really what created the success minded, was that we had a couple of high performers like myself and also my friend Spencer. And we understood that, pushing ourselves so hard, while it's something that's going to be very positive over the long run, certainly already has been, there's also this need for balance, right? There's this need to ensure that whatever you're striving towards is making you feel fulfilled. So the success minded is about how do you pursue excellence while living a meaningful life at the same time. And that balance is very complicated. It differs person by person. There are some people that I know that never feel anxiety or never feel stress. And I'm not going to say that I envy them, but a part of me really envies them, where they just feel like they have this endless engine that can just go on and on forever. So that's what it's really all about, is just allowing the reader to explore that balance for themselves and understand for themselves and put that into practice. How do they strike that right balance? Because ultimately we only have one life, right? And that means two things. Number one, it means that it has to be, it has to have some element of excellence to it. You have to be great in your domain. But it also means that you have to be happy and fulfilled, because that's equally important.
That's great. I think it's so important to have that balance, with the self-awareness, the emotional intelligence. And it seems like the success minded has not only been a valuable resource for others, but in a lot of ways, it's a way for you to sort of process what you're going through as you're, going after your goals. Because if it's just go, 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 go all the time and, you don't release any steam, it can, what's the point? You have to
Yep.
enjoy life, enjoy the fruits of your labor. So I love that you have this balanced approach. And now we're going to get into the meat of the conversation here, development AI. So tell me what development AI looks like today.
Yeah, it certainly looks a lot different than when we first started it. That's for sure. But it's because we've learned, we've been at this for about 15 months now. We've been officially at it for about 9 months. And in that time, we have spoken with probably somewhere around 200 or 300 developers. Most of them are in Boston. There's actually a lot more developers in Boston than I ever would have thought. But most of them have been in Boston. Some of them have been in New York. Some of them have been in places like Colorado or Charlotte or Austin or places in Florida. And it's development AI is a product of getting the feedback of developers and then making software that replicates their workflow and improves their workflow, especially from an acquisitions perspective. So from an acquisitions perspective, we help developers identify and then source the most underutilized properties. So looking, for instance, at properties that are, say, single families in a 3-family zone, or maybe you're looking for vacant land that's zoned by right for a mobile home park, so you can mitigate your entitlement risk. But fundamentally, it's about integrating in the zoning map, the zoning rules and restrictions, and then overlaying that onto assessor data to see where these properties are that have a lot of potential to be something a lot more dense or something that's going to provide a lot more value for the landowner, highest and best use. The second piece is, particularly in the large metros like Boston, we're able to get a lot of hyper-granular data on projects that have been approved or denied, and some insight into why those projects have been approved or denied by, be it a zoning board or a planning board or a more, a larger, more encompassing authority like the BPDA, providing insight into those, and then also providing insight into the teams that have been successful in doing those projects. So the attorneys, the architects, and then also the parties that show up in support and opposition. From that data, extrapolating things like, if I'm going to go develop an XYZ area, what team should I use? Or if I'm going to be developing in this neighborhood, then who are the individuals that I should go knock on their door first, right? And make them the project champions. So that's what it's about. It's acquisitions and also mitigating entitlement risk today. And I think that, in a couple of years, it'll probably look a lot different.
That's great. And I can speak to that as a developer. What I focus on mainly is, brownstone, luxury, condo conversions, and purchasing properties and basically working within the existing footprint of the building. And I, more than anyone, know that, in this market, margins are getting tighter and tighter. So there is a need for developers to seek out plots of land where there are upzoning potential, because that's where you're really going to make the money, right? Outside of whatever the existing building envelope is. And the problem that you're solving there for us is, I don't have time to drive around all day and look for single families on a 2-acre lot and then call my zoning attorney and, try to figure out, what the zoning allows. This software you've created is a one-stop shop for developers like me to pinpoint development opportunities. So that is extremely valuable. Secondly, in Boston, this is a city, ripe with a ton of restrictions. I work in Beacon Hill, for example, which is arguably the most difficult neighborhood to build in because of, the historic commissions and, all of those factions that go along with it. So your service allows me to really measure my risk going into a product. I'll know who the players are in those ZBA meetings. I'll know what is the likelihood of me changing the use of this building, who's done it. So for that, I think development AI is a great resource, certainly something that, I'm interested in bringing on to my team. So, having said that, what kind of developers have you seen the most traction with to date?
Yeah, it's a great question. To date, and I think this is largely just a function of the fact that we're still relatively new, is to date, the developers that we've had the most traction with have been developers that are maybe anywhere from 2 to 5 individuals at the shop that are doing probably 2 to 3 projects a year. And they're taking, for instance, those single families and turning them into 9 units. That's the majority. But that being said, we have taken on some pretty niche use cases, because we are ingesting in the zoning rules and restrictions for not just residential developments, but any type of development, any type of land use, be it a bakery or a automotive, a car wash, or be it industrial facilities, or be it RV home parks or mobile home parks, or even battery energy storage systems. If there's anything in the zoning code with regards to a particular type of use, then it's something that can be meshed into our system. And I think that longer term, those niche use cases are really probably where we're going to see a ton of our business. But right now, it's mostly smaller developers that are doing 2 to 3 projects a year that have 2 to 5 people and typically a dedicated person to acquisitions.
Awesome. So what does development AI look like going forward? I mean, what is your vision for this company? What does the future look like for you?
Yeah. The nearer term future looks like expanding our services a lot more. To date, we've expanded to a number of geographies, not only just in the greater Boston area, but also outside of Boston. So most notably in New York City and also in a couple of areas in Colorado. We spend a lot of time looking at the metrics of each individual market and determine kind of which one we want to go into next. It's probably going to be somewhere, where obviously where there's a lot of development taking place, and a lot of the development is happening in the Sunbelt markets, right? So like Nashville, Charlotte, Austin, Jacksonville, Orlando, Atlanta, markets like that. So I think that in the next year or so, we're going to really expand our presence down there. And then I think longer term, we really want to be partnering with, for instance, the big box retailers and collecting a lot of data on how development is taking place in these different markets, and then being partners with those firms and how they expand strategically into different markets.
Very smart. Yeah, I find that with a lot of these tech startups these days, it starts as, a very utilitarian system, like in this case for developers, but the real value in the bigger picture is always the underlying data. So that's clearly something that you guys are keeping in mind as you grow, correct?
Yeah, the data is definitely, one of the most important pieces. But I think the other most important piece is really just our founding team. The value that we're able to provide, just because, right now we are a small team, we have a limited number of clients. The amount of individualized and personalized attention that we can devote to each of the clients that we work with, I think is really where we add the value. Because if there's something missing, for instance, which there are always things that we can do to be better, right? And a lot of times it takes individuals that are outside of our company to tell us what those things are, right? So it's a mutualistic relationship between us and our clients, where they're giving us feedback as we're walking through the tool with them and training them how to use it. And then we take that feedback and quickly incorporate it into the tool to make it better. So our founding team, it's myself, it's my business partner, Kevin, and also my business partner, Felipe. And we all have very complementary personalities and skill sets. And I think that's really what's going to allow us to succeed over the long run is our people, So already, even though it's just the 3 of us on the founding team, we have a culture, we have a set of values, and we want to make sure that anybody that we bring on in the future, which that point will come, they have to make sure that, it's a fit from a values perspective and from a mission perspective. And it's people that are passionate about the project, that are going to work more than 40 hours because they want to, not because they feel like they have to. People who are passionate about the vision the same way that we are. Fundamentally, in any organization, it's about the people, right? Like even as a developer, it's who your team is, right? It's who your architect is, it's who your attorney is. And most importantly, when you get to construction, it's who your contractor is, especially because in the contracting world, as you and I know, both from having experience in that realm, that's where you can stand to lose the most, right? So it's all about the same way that it's about a team for a real estate investor, real estate developer. It's also a team for us. So that's really the most important piece, not necessarily the data, even though that is very important.
Of course. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because team is number one for me as well. If anyone ever asks me, like, what does it take to do a good development project, or how have you had the success you've had today? 100% team. It's like you said, the architect, my general contractor, all the players coming together. And I think you brought up an excellent point there about, feedback, just always being open to feedback, always kind of being willing to adjust and do things differently. And that's how, you as entrepreneurs grow, but, also how your company grows. So thank you for bringing that up. And, lastly, for our listeners, if we have some developers on the call, how can we learn more about development AI? How can they get in touch with you if they want to see, a demo? How would that work?
Yeah. So the best place is really on our website, developmentai.net. We can also be found on LinkedIn. My personal social media is also very active. So Carson_Hess on Instagram, Carson Hess on LinkedIn are probably the two best ways to get into touch with me. And really, if you're a developer, like me leading sales for development AI, I never want to be in a position where I'm selling somebody something that they don't need. And so what that means is, I really take every call that I have with developers as an opportunity to learn something. And if there's something that we can do to support your guys' use case, then that's great. It's going to be a synergistic relationship and we're going to enjoy working together. But, if it turns out that it's not a fit, then, that's fine too. And if there's anything that I can do to help you, then I'm still going to do whatever I can. A lot of times that's making introductions. Like I said, I've talked with probably 200 or 300 developers over the last 15 months, and a lot of zoning attorneys, a lot of architects. I talk with a lot of lenders just through my own, for instance, personal real estate investing. And so there's probably somebody that I know that I can connect you with. And so at the very least, let's just have the conversation. And if there's anything that I can do to help you, then I'll be sure to do so.
Amazing. Carson, thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure having you. I will
Thanks for having me.
All of the information below, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Carson.
Thanks, Gaetano.